Woke up this morning feeling fine. There's something special on my mind. Last night.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to another edition of our podcast, Conversations with B'nai B'rith. I'm CEO Dan Mariaschin. If you enjoy the show, subscribe to or follow Conversations with B'nai B'rith wherever you get your podcasts. And please rate us, too. We always appreciate your feedback. And of course, you can also subscribe to our YouTube channel and like us on Facebook for all of our latest content. Today, I'm speaking with the man who managed, among others, Herman's Hermits, the brilliant 10cc, Snooker superstars Alex Hurricane Higgins and Jimmy Whirlwind White. It's Harvey Lisberg. Harvey's revealing, entertaining, and moving memoir, I'm Into Something Good, My Life Managing 10cc, Herman's Hermits, and many more, shares the highs and lows of managing rock and roll legends, snooker players and athletes, growing up Jewish in Manchester, and the complexities of the music business. Harvey, welcome. Thank you for being here today.
Yeah, it's nice being here with you.
Well, I just want to say I truly enjoyed the book. It's a great read, and it's a must read for anyone who grew up in the golden age of the 60s and 70s rock period. The ups and downs, and sometimes the chaos, all of it was fascinating. I couldn't put it down. Now, before we get into your career, I want to go back a bit earlier first. You were raised in a close-knit Jewish family in a Jewish neighborhood in Manchester, England. Tell us about your family, including your grandmother, Gertie, whom you make special mention of in the book. I know they were musically inclined because your father played instruments and I think even played in a band. There was a piano in the house. In fact, you write in the book that your first musical recollections are earlier than that, from the age of 3, but you played the piano, and the first song you played was Smile, which was a big hit for Nat King Cole and so many others. So tell us about growing up in Manchester.
Well, I was, as you say, it was a close-knit family, and my grandparents, Henry, came from Poland. My grandmother, Gertie, came from Romania. The roots were from Romania, and we were pretty Orthodox. I went to shul every day with my grandfather from the age of about 5 every day. So I remember going to this Romanian shul, and I remember on Mondays and Thursdays, a pot of whiskey everybody had after the thing, and I hated that. I subsequently became to like whiskey, but I didn't like it then. But I went to shul every day, as I say, with shacharis every day. And my grandfather was in the box at the shul, quite an important person there, the treasurer or something. And so it was a really Orthodox shul, and I was a war baby, so I started going just after the war, and things were pretty somber. The music was very melancholy. It was a very heavy, somber period. And I also went to the Jewish day school, which was an ultra-Orthodox shul, not shul. And that was very interesting as well. Really, I was fascinated by the names of all the people. They were from all over Europe: Pinchas Schneck, Moshe Makani, and the rabbi was Rabbi Aaron Troy, and and he was the head of the Beth Din as well at the time. It was really heavy duty, very, very religious upbringing from that point of view. And also, my grandfather lived next door to Rabbi Goldich, who was also head of the Beth Din, and further up the road, Rabbi Altman, who was the chief rabbi of Manchester. So it was really, really, if you went in a car on Shabbat, you better watch all the curtains moving from widows looking at what's going on. How can they go in the car? And it was heavy duty Jewishness. There was no kosher, of course, and that was how I was brought up. So as far as my knowledge of prayers and everything, I can remember everything even to this day. It was instilled in me at the age of 5 and 6. And it was just there, and it just went on forever. We then moved to another shul. My parents' shul was the Crumpsall shul, which originally Rabbi Koppel Rosen was the rabbi in about 1948 onwards. And he, of course, became the head of Carmel College. And he was a wonderful speaker and a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful rabbi. Deep voice, very good looking, very charismatic is the correct word for that. And so I went to the Kranzschule, had the most amazing choir, just unbelievable, by a choir master called Fabian Gonski. And he had this fantastic, I mean, I loved going to shul just to hear the music. And Kol Nidre was just unbelievable. I mean, it was like going to listen to the opera. So all these musical things were going through my head at that time. I was also learning the piano with a teacher. And as I said, you said that, I did Smiling, which was in 1 flat F, I think, which I learned on the piano.
But you were self-taught. You didn't want to go through the scales. You wanted to put that aside and then go right to stuff.
I had a teacher, then every damn day I was going 5-finger scales up and down every key, and I was going out of my mind. It wasn't fun, and I just couldn't cope with it eventually. It was so boring. It's a bit like accountancy. So I started fiddling around, and my auntie, who was my mother's sister, Sylvia, she was just a natural pianist. She could play anything by ear, and I just used to look at her with amazement. And I thought, well, one day I want to do that. And I sort of got into the habit of it, learned a few chords, and I started improvising. So musically, and that was that area of my Jewishness, and everything was very Jewish. And, you know, you had to be careful, you had to be quiet, you know, always very well behaved, never wanted to stand out in a crowd, you know. It was like a subconscious culture, which Israel got rid of when I got to Israel. There was a revolution in me, and I couldn't believe what was going on. I can never forget that first time I went to Israel. Well, I went on a kibbutz for 3 months, but I went to visit my cousins on a Friday night. Friday night was very sacred for me, but the family was always there. Friday night was, you don't go out on a Friday night, you're staying in. I went to Israel, and we had this fantastic meal my cousins invited me to. And after they'd eaten, all of a sudden they brought all cards out. I couldn't believe it. They were playing cards. They were playing poker on a Friday night. But what's going on here? All my life I've been not being able to go out on a Friday. I know in Israel, and everybody's playing cards and they're smoking, God knows what. It was a revelation. And because when you went to Israel, you could speak out loud. You didn't have to talk in soft tones.
Just to talk about, to move to the music, because who was it? Was it your father or your grandfather who was a big opera fan?
My father. Yes, my father had a series of recordings of Tito Gobi doing Puccini or La Bohème or every Aida, you name it. Our house, all day and night, all I heard was this bloody Puccini and Tito Gobi. It was coming out of my ears. And then next door, we had a guy called Leo Rubel, and he was from Hungary, and he liked classical music. So whenever I went around there, it was Beethoven or Bach or whatever it was. And there was always a fight. He thought the opera was rubbish. My father liked opera. And there's always this musical. Wherever I went, it was like next door. So we're always involved in this music going on. And it just infiltrated. And I went to some wonderful operas with my father in Italy. I went to see Aida with 2,000 people. I mean, I opened their stage. I mean, it was unbelievable. These are all the things that sort of went into me, but I didn't realize at the time. I just thought, well, it's just a noise.
Well, they were all important inputs because you had the religious music, you had the popular music after the war, you had classical music, opera. Now, growing up as you did, right in the heart of the first great rock and roll era, I'm talking now as a teenager, who were your favorite groups and singers at that time?
It's a good question. I'm trying to work out the time period because Bill Haley and the Comets started in 56. I would have been 16 then. Basically, it was all American, of course. You know, it was Neil Sedaka or whatever. Dion, I don't know. There was all the doo-wop era, all that sort of thing. All that music infiltrated, and we heard that in coffee bars and in dance clubs and that sort of thing. I'm trying to think. Elvis Presley, of course, was huge. I mean, I liked Elvis Presley a lot. I'm trying to think what else. I just liked music. Anything that was good, I liked. I really didn't like the crooners particularly, and I came to love Frank Sinatra eventually. But at the time, I thought, well, it's old man's music. You know, as you said, you were talking about Nat King Cole, you know, Johnny Ray. All those influences, we were inundated with American music, and it was pretty boring. And then, like you say, you had Elvis Presley and the rock and roll Bill Haley, and that sort of leveled off. I love Chuck Berry, by the way. I just thought he was tremendous. Jerry Lee Lewis, Fats Domino.
That brings us to the Beatles. Now, you say in your book, and it's really quite insightful, that the Beatles not only brought us great music, but also enabled British rock, including what became the British invasion of the American music scene, for British rock to have its own identity. In other words, until they came along, very few British artists had really made it in America. But from the Beatles, you write that British influence only grew and never looked back.
That's right. We took over the airwaves because we only had American singers. English acts were singing with American accents. It was weird. You know, I mentioned in the book, like, Rod Stewart says police. Well, we don't say police, we say police. I mean, there's no police. It's just ridiculous. But because it was American and it sounded good, maybe it sounded like Lightning Hopkins or something, it was done. But once the Beatles came along, they could just sing with their own accent and their own sound. The humor was tremendous. The music was tremendous. The writing was tremendous. They were the perfect band, really. They were just incredible.
Now, you've got a background in accounting, and I'm sure that even though it was limited in terms of the number of years, I'm sure it helped you as you moved into music management. So how do we go from the music that you were hearing in the clubs, let's say in Manchester, to a music management career path?
Well, it's fate, isn't it? I learned how to play the guitar, and I started writing songs, and I wanted to get my songs to various artists. The songs were sort of songs that weren't clever, but they were just poppy, like a Freddie and the Dreamers song or a Jerry and the Pacemakers, How Do You Do What You Do? And I had all these songs which I wrote with a partner, and I thought they were good, and nobody else did them and couldn't get anywhere near them. So I was studying accountancy, and I went to university to avoid the 5-year drudgery of an accountancy. And in the defense of the accountant's office, I moved eventually to a firm called Binder Hamlin, where they represented the grades, and they were the biggest entertainment agency in England, representing everything, the Palladium, Talk of the Town. They were the bee's knees. So they accommodated me. So when I started with getting a band, etc., they helped me. So although the actual work was terrible, the people at the firm were lovely. So I was writing these songs, getting nowhere, and I decided, well, I must get my own band. Maybe they'll do my songs. So that's how that started, and we put an advert in the Manchester Evening News. We're looking for a band, etc. I ended up in this church hall in Davyhulme, which is a tiny district in Manchester where there was a band playing. So I went there, and they were playing Chuck Berry. I saw us standing there. Every band did the same set. It was like, as it happens, they did Mrs. Brown, You've Got a Lovely Daughter in there, which is totally different to everything else. But I went there, and after each number, the stage was charged. Everybody went flying. Girls were screaming, and I thought I'd won the national lottery. I thought, this is unbelievable. I subsequently found out that they planted people in the audience. They told the audience that some big American manager is coming to look at them, and would they participate in the applause and make sure there was an atmosphere. So, and that band was Herman and the Hermits. So that was extraordinarily lucky.
So you were in your early 20s when you tell us about how that happened. So originally, Peter Noone was not in the original group, correct?
He was when I saw him that night. Yes, he was there. But originally, he was in Coronation Street, which was a huge TV soap in England, the biggest. And he was Len Fairclough's son, one of the lead characters in it. So he had an acting experience when he was 12. He was bubbly. He looked great, and he was very cheeky. Well, he still is. He's amazing now. I mean, he's a great entertainer. And as I say, I was lucky that was the band that I saw. I went back to his house. I started fiddling around on the piano, playing Jerry Lee Lewis, and he said, "Would you like to join the band?" I said, "No, I want to manage the band, and I want you to do my music." I ended up with a B-side at least, and I'm into something good. And in those days, it was so ridiculous that anybody that wrote the B-side got the same mechanicals as the person that wrote the A-side. So I shared the royalties with Goffin and King, some minor writers. I was very lucky there. And my father was...
You can't be in better company than Goffin and King. Now, you write in the book, I'm Into Something Good, about EMI record producer, legend, Mickey Most, and the role that he had in choosing music for artists that were under his supervision. But your own sense of what could sell was certainly evident at every turn. And Herman's Hermits took off like a rocket. Each hit, and there were so many, I'm Into Something Good, No Milk Today, There's a Kind of Hush, Listen People, and of course, Henry VIII, I Am, and Mrs. Brown, You've Got a Lovely Daughter. Each one was different than the other. So no derivative music there. So to what do you attribute the tremendous following that Herman's Hermits had? Was it the music? Was it Peter Noon, or was it both?
It was definitely both. I mean, Mickey Most had a wonderful ear. He could pick something. I mean, House the Rising Sun for the Animal classic. You know what I mean? He had a band called Hot Chocolate. Amazing. For us, we used Sam Cooke, Wonderful World, Silhouettes from the Rays, Goffin King. But there was one derivative one. That was the second record in England called Show Me Girl, which was also written by Goffin King, which subsequently wasn't a big hit. This, of course, everybody, all my friends used to say, what are you wasting your time with that band for? They're a load of rubbish. Meanwhile, I got a full date sheet for them. But, and then when they had the hit, all these friends, it's the kind of Jewish, Manchester, sarcastic post-war, humor. Oh, what are you wasting your time for? Get a proper job, become an accountant. By the way, my idea of becoming an accountant was not to be an accountant. I wanted to be a stockbroker, and there were no Jewish stockbrokers. There was maybe one, Navarro, I don't know. But my idea was I'm going to become a bloody stockbroker because I was mad on shares, losing fortunes even in those days on options and God knows what. Every time, it was just in my blood, and that was I was never going to go in the music business. This just happened to happen. And then while I'm doing my finals of my of a crash course on accountancy, Herman's Hermits record is zooming up the charts in America, and I'm phoning MGM, speaking to A&M from a payphone, and it just got out of hand. And I said to my father, "Look, I've got to let me have a go at this." And meanwhile, Epstein had become an icon, and I thought, well, if he can do it with no musical background, with no experience, why couldn't I? And if Liverpool can do it, why can't Manchester do it? We hate Liverpool anyhow, so. Everything was going to be centered around Manchester anyhow, so that was all part of the plan.
Well, speaking of Manchester, tell us about your lifelong partnership and friendship with songwriter and fellow Mancunian Graham Gouldman, who gave us so many memorable hits for the Yardbirds, the Hollies, Herman's Hermits, and of course 10cc.
Yeah, well, Graham was in a band called the Whirlwinds, which is a Jewish band. This was in probably 1961 or 62. And for some reason, which I still don't understand now, I used to go and watch them. I think there was a music night at the Jewish Lads Brigade, and they used to play this band, the Whirlwinds. They played all fantastic Italian hits, Marino Marini and Volare, all that type of music, which I loved at the time, and they were the only people that played it. So they were very good. Graham was in the band, wonderful, wonderful guitarist. They all were great singers, and used to finish with Alexander's Ragtime Band with all the hands going like that. There was just an amazing band. They had an awful manager. Well, I say an awful manager. They had an unapproachable manager. What the hell I was doing there, or why I was there, I don't know. And I asked Phil Cohen, who lives in Israel, was the lead singer of the band a few weeks ago. I said, why was I there? I wasn't in the music business. I had nothing to do with it. Why was I watching you 2 years before I even got in the business? And he said, we don't know. We said, we saw you there all the time, and we wondered who you were. And he said, I was the only person that knew you because I played football with you, and I knew you from football. All the rest of the band didn't even know you. So that was, I still can't work out why I was there, but Graham lived very near to me, within half a mile. All of us lived in the within 3 miles. Kevin Godley, Law Green, myself, Graham, were all within 2-mile radius. And everybody knew everybody else because it's a ghetto. So, you know, everybody lived, you know, one thing I didn't mention earlier on, which is everybody from the family lived on our street. It was number 22, 26, 28, you know, all different members of the family. So it was like it was so close. You know, you're always in each other's house. And anyhow, so I started to get some success with Herman's Hermits about 2 years later. The Whirlwinds, although they had a good date sheet, they never seemed to get anywhere. They had a few records put out, and I don't think they were hits. And I got talking to Graham and said, well, why don't you let me have a go with you? And I had some success with Herman's Hermits. I was treated quite seriously. And I got very friendly with Graham. And I signed a development deal with me. I gave him a retainer. And I said, why don't you write songs? And he started writing songs. And I used to go around to his house every day from 9 to 5. It was like an office. And we used to write songs together. I used to edit things. You know, he'd come up with a song and I'd say, well, try something else, especially in For Your Love. When it came to the break and the rhythm, oh, why don't we try something else? And he comes up with it. And also House For Your Love. And I said, why don't we do something on the House of Rising Sun chords? And he surreptitiously changed the last chord minimally, and then wrote the song on those chords, and it worked. So that was a treat, and that was obviously a huge hit. And I was very close with Graham. That close that we became brother-in-laws. We both married sisters. So, I mean, we was like, not only was he songwriter and friend, brother, this, that, and the other. Yeah, it's just incredible relationship, which lasted a long time before it finished, but there it is.
Most groups, even popular ones like Hermits, have a shelf life. Peter Noone went on to perform as a single act, but for years he's been a regular fixture on satellite radio, PBS. Now, following the breakup of Herman's Hermits, you had a tremendous second act in management with the group 10cc. Tell us about the group. What made the sound so distinct and memorable? I'm thinking of I'm Not in Love and The Things We Do for Love off the top of my head, but there are so many others. Tell us about 10cc.
I started being involved with Kevin Lowell in 1964. At the same time, I was involved with Graham. Kevin Lowell wrote beautiful songs, and again, there was no success with them. It's rather like when I was writing songs, we were getting beautiful songs, but their songs were beautiful, mine were, but they were beautiful songs, and we got nowhere with them. But they were there, and I used to help them in the way they did a mural at my house, which took 12 weeks for them to do, and I paid them a retainer to do it. They were always doing artistic things. They came from artistic college. They were very, very talented, avant-garde. And Graham was writing hit after hit at the time. Incidentally, you said I went from Herman's Hermits to 10cc, but really after Herman's Hermits, I think Tony Christie was our next big act, and then we went to 10cc. But going back to 10cc, because that was so important, Eric was in the Mindbenders. He'd had a hit. I joined forces with Danny Vitesh to form Kennedy Street Enterprises. He had a load of acts, and between us, we had the 1, 2, and 3 in Billboard in 1965. And that again, but I'm saying that because Wayne Fontana of the Mindbenders, whom Eric was lead singer was in that before he left that, became the Mindbenders. And then it all evolved. So I had Graham, who wrote hit after hit, and I worked with every day. Kevin Lowell was churning out hits, doing things, artwork, murals, paintings, designs for programs on TV, all sorts of things like that. And then we got into Strawberry Studio because Eric wanted to have a studio in Manchester, and everything we wanted to do was to be in Manchester, not to leave Manchester and go to London to record. So they developed Strawberry Studios. And once they've got that going, then they had to do all the experimentation on sound. And Kevin Lowell and Eric came up with a track called Neanderthal Man, which was done when they were trying to test drum sounds out in the studio. And it became a hit, a huge hit in Europe. And so that started that. Then Graham was asked to join them to do an opening set with the Moody Blues. on a tour, and then they've got together. And I, in the meantime, kept trying to do records with all of them. They were put out as different names, great songs like There Ain't No Mbopo, People Passing By, all sort of obscure songs under different names trying to get hits. And none of it really worked. And then finally, because of Tony Christie, I managed to acquire Neil Sedaka, which was quite an interesting story. I was looking for. I went to. You asked me before, who do I like in the early days, and I said Neil Sedaka was one of the people I liked. And I went into the Brill building with Donny Kirshner, who was a friend of mine, and I said, "Whatever happened to Neil Sedaka?" He said, "Oh, he's upstairs. He said, do you want to meet him?" I said, "Yeah, I'd like to meet him. That's really nice." I went up with Carol, my wife, into this little room, which was about 9 foot by 6 foot, with an upright piano, and there's Neil. So Donny said, "Would you play some of your new songs?" So I played a few songs, and the last one was "Is This the Way to my Amarillo?" And I said, "That's fantastic. I want that." So they looked at each other. Neil didn't like it particularly. Donny Kirshner didn't see it. But I had to keep, and I went back to England, and my wife said, "Get on the phone, get that demo." I got the demo, got down to London. The producers of Tony Christie did it the next day. It went in the charts to number 18, which was very disappointing. But 20 years later, as a charity record, because of a video done by a comedian called Peter Kay, it was the biggest record of 2004. It was number 1 for about 12 weeks. So now Neil Sedaka, Danny Kirshner couldn't believe it. He said, "I thought I had his, but that's tremendous of it. Thank you very much." And I said, "Well, why don't you let Neil come and do some recording over in the studio? I've got all these fantastic musicians. 10cc hadn't evolved, they're all individual." He knew about Graham Boomer because he'd had so many hits, but the rest were kind of, they'd gotten in cream from Adam. So, all right, we'll try and do a session there. Let's do 3 numbers there. Well, he came over to do 3 numbers, and he did 2 albums there. And he was amazing, Neil Sedaka. He used to go in the morning and before the session, he'd get on the piano and he'd play Calendar Girl, Breaking Up His Heart, and all of 10cc was sitting on the floor with me, and we're getting this concert before we start. And because I used to, on Sunday morning, I used to take bagels and lox because he loved that. And we were the best bagels in the world in Manchester. The best smoked salmon you can name from a shop called Titanic, named after somebody's grandparents that died in the Titanic or something. And it was incredible. And you know what? Instead of giving me a proper credit on the album, because I did so much for Neil, it's bagels and lox, Harvey. That was my credit.
But you know, you write about this. You write about this in your book, where Sedaka comes and he does these albums. Now, one of the albums was, and one of the songs from that album became a very big hit and really kind of revived his career, and that was Solitaire.
Yeah,
which was a great song.
Beautiful words. Oh, it is a marvelous song. But the other thing, he came round to our house and in Singleton Road, North Manchester, and I had a piano. Yeah, I did have a piano. I think I had a piano put in specially because wherever he went, that to be a piano. But anyway, I had a demo of The Troll Days Are Over, which is a song relating to him and Howie Greenfield splitting up, because the Troll Days are over. And he plays it, and I play it. I said, "Do you want to hear the demo? I've just got it now." And I'm sitting in the room with my 2 kids who are about 5 and 11, Paul and Philip, and Carol. And Neil starts crying in the middle of the song, really crying, serious crying. The kids are in hysterics now, and Carol has to get them out of the room. I shut them out because they'd never seen a man cry like that probably before. And then Neil at the end said to me, "Did I write that?" I said, "Yeah, it's brilliant, isn't it?"
But just to go back to 10cc, what was it about that sound? I'm Not in Love. It's such a haunting and moving song. What was it that produced that really very unique sound?
Well, I always had to find music hits for all my acts, all Mickey Most did. Once I got 10cc in the studio, and they were in their own studio, they had free studio time because they worked on downtime. If people were recording and the studio was flat, they'd go in and record. So they had a lot of time to do experimentation in sound. And they would deliver me the most amazing tracks. I mean, Rubber Bullets which wasn't a hit in America. It was a superb track. Wall Street Shuffle. They had about 12 hits in England before anything really had happened in America. And then one day I went and started on a new album, and I sat down and they said, we've got a new track. And I listened to I'm Not in Love, unmixed, in the studio. And it was the most astonishing feeling I ever had. The atmosphere of the record in that studio, it made you shiver. And that was just a masterpiece. It was the involvement of the fusion of Kevin Lol, who were humorous, artistic, avant-garde, crazy, and Eric and Graham, who were the establishment of the band, traditional pop hits. And that together, Eric was a brilliant engineer, so the sounds are all coned. It was really a self-contained unit. I mean, more than anybody else. They didn't have a George Martin or anybody. It was inside the band. And there were obviously a lot of tension between the four of them because they were very different people. And, I don't know what went on because I just was sitting pretty. I was a manager who was being delivered beautiful music all the time. That did stand out though. And I knew that was going to be an absolute iconic song, definitely. And it was.
Well, Harvey, it wasn't only music. You've managed some noteworthy soccer or football, as you would say, stars, some of England's leading pool or snooker, as you would say, players. What led you into that side of management, particularly in the 1980s? And what was it like? Was it a totally different world, or were there similarities between the music business and that?
There were similarities, but what had happened was the punk revolution arrived and everybody was having to change their thoughts about music. They didn't like the overindulgent, rich, capitalistic 10cc, Pink Floyd, whoever it was, they were out. It was the Sex Pistols, the Fall, whatever, Stranglers, it was a new revolution. I thought, they're not going to play our music. We're getting less popular. And I wanted to do something else. I always wanted to expand the business in different ways. It was just part of me. And I wanted to get into sport. So a friend of mine had a snooker hall. And one of the employees of the firm, Roy Speak, he was a very good snooker player. And he introduced me to this guy. And this guy was actually Alex Higgins' best friend. But there was Jimmy Whirlwind White, who was a 21-year-old amazing snooker player, fastest thing you've ever seen, the most brilliant player. And I decided, well, I'll try and go into that. And it's difficult for me to describe to an American audience what snooker was like, but it was huge. It was on TV day and night. It was very popular. And all the people had dinner suits on with bow ties, all looked like penguins. And I thought, right, we've got this kid here, and we're going to redo his image. We're going to change the face of snooker, which we did. So I just did everything for him. I want him to have a punk hairstyle, but I was voted out by the rest of the people in my company saying, no, we're not going to go with that. But we did change his hairstyle. And I'm in the south of France with my wife, and I see a beautiful houndstooth dinner suit in a place called Claude Bonucci. It was just an amazing dinner suit. I got the dinner suit, and Carol had to measure. Before we went to the France, I knew I was going to get a suit in France for him. Carol had to measure Jimmy White like a tailor. It was hysterical. He's standing on a box and Carol's measuring his inside leg. And I'm killing myself. And it was just a very funny situation. Took the suit back. He looked like $1 million in it. I then went to Patrick Litchfield, Lord Litchfield, who'd just taken the photographs of the royal wedding of Charles and Diana. And he was the biggest photographer in England. I got him to do photographs. And then I stuck him on the TV, and everybody, woo, this is different, somebody different. And he got thrashed 9-0 by the reigning champion, Steve Davis, who was a very solid player. And I said, well, I'll do the interview afterwards. I don't want. He can't put a 21-year-old in front of, after being beaten 9-0, to have an interview with a sarcastic. And the first question he said was this guy called David Vine. He says, do you really think you've helped trying to change the image of somebody? Wouldn't it have been better if he'd have sort of concentrated on his snooker? And I said, well, I saw you getting your makeup on before you came on this program. At which stage, that was the end of that. I just put him so far down, he couldn't recover that. He was very polite after that. It was the end of that. But Jimmy White was a wild man. Yes. Similarities, yes. The similarities were drink, drugs, whatever the same drug dealers are always in the bloody halls. You know, you've seen them all before at the rock concerts. You've seen them there. So yes, but the snooker player has to, in inverted commas, be reasonably fit to be able to play. It didn't apply to Higgins and Jimmy White because they were just ludicrous. They had big drinking problems. The parents were all drinkers. They were serious. I mean, in those days, it wasn't so much drugs. I mean, drink was the big problem then. If I went into the lawyer's office at 9 o'clock in the morning, they're pouring a huge scotch in a Waterford glass with ice in it. It's 9 in the morning. You know, and Irving Landau was a lovely man. He was the solicitor. And they used to like hard scotch. My God. And so the bands and everybody were on scotch. That's all that they did. Well, I'm trying to think what else was like. The other thing that was interesting was the publicity angle. They got more publicity in snooker in 6 weeks than I had in 20 years with excessive rock stars. It was such big business. And Alex Higgins, he said, I'm not doing that interview, Harvey. I said, why not? He says, I want £600 for that. Now, I would have torn my shirt off to get an interview with the Times with Peter Noon. And Alex Higgins charges the Times and gets the money. They sort of taught me something, that all that publicity that we'd given free to the newspaper, here's somebody that's got a different angle on it. It was a crazy man.
You must have missed a big income stream then all of those years by not charging for the interviews.
Absolutely unbelievable. No, because you needed the press to get. You needed the press, but the press needed the snooker stories because that was the thing of the moment. It's probably the same in America with football or whatever. So the craze at the moment. But
let me just ask one final question before we close. And really, you've covered decades of a business that changes, it waxes, it wanes. What made the music business that you were deeply involved in and the business today so different? How does it differ?
The difference is, well, first of all, in the 60s, the song was the most important thing. So it wasn't a question of a band writing their own music. They used to get songs from songwriters, as Tim Panelli. So there was a wealth of wonderful music where you could get it to an artist and they would do it. Like Goffin King got I'm Just Something Good to Us. Like, that was great. Then there was a self-written stuff that came afterwards, which wasn't quite the same. It wasn't as singles orientated. It was more album orientated. Then we got into all different types of well, it's such a long time. I've been doing it for so long. The 60s was the time of the songs. The 70s was the time of the producers. The 80s was punk. The 90s was electronic. Everything moved along. But obviously the revolution of social media in this century has completely blasted everything away. Record companies are very slow to realize the potential of all the new inventions and the new sort of ways of getting things. And everything now is geared to merchandising, packaging, streaming. In those days, all I wanted was a good song, like House of the Rising Sun. You got a hit, and the radio would play it. You didn't need 1 million streams to get signed. You just had to be good, and you did a good live set. I don't think that happens today. Everything is sort of, packaged, merchandise, accountants deciding what risks to take, what not to take. It's a very different business to what it was in the early days. And the future, in my opinion, they all talk about AI, what the hell's going to happen? Well, I think in 50 years' time, there will be, not saying robots, but there will be alternative music production, because the ABBA won't be around in 50 years' time. But you might have some kind of other visual sound things, so that people, instead of going to an orchestra and hearing Beethoven, they'll go and see what was 100 years ago, the music of that day, presented through whatever technology comes along. The brilliance of the musician will have to adapt to whatever happens. There will be problems with rights and all that sort of thing, and people getting paranoid. But we had all that with streaming, and yet now everybody listens to music on the. They don't listen. They don't buy records, do they?
Well, all of this and so much more can be found in Harvey Lisberg's fascinating memoir. Here it is. I'm Into Something Good, My Life Managing 10cc, Herman's Hermits, and many more, which is out now, and it's available wherever you purchase books. Very nice speaking with you, Harvey. Really, it's been great. I say this as a fan, not only as the host of this program. Thanks again for all of the great music that you and your bands brought to millions of fans and listeners all over the world. And thanks for being with us on this program.
It's been a great pleasure, and I know you do a great job. And thanks for that.
Well, thank you again to my guest, Harvey Lisberg, for joining us, and to you for tuning in to our podcast conversations with B'nai B'rith. We hope you've enjoyed what you've heard. And if you did, please leave us a rating on Apple Podcasts and Spotify, and share this episode with friends and others. For all of our latest content, and if you haven't already, follow or subscribe to Conversations with B'nai B'rith, wherever you get your podcasts, subscribe to our YouTube channel, and like us on Facebook. For my guest, Harvey Lisberg, this is your host, Dan Mariaschin. Thanks for being with us. Take care, everyone.